Yeah, I'm not sure why it does that,
This
but
this the glasses right here,
yeah.
that's terrible. What do you do to fix that? Do you just like get more light?
No, you get anti-glare lenses.
Ah, you're
See.
right.
Wait. Watch. See,
Oh
look,
my
look at
gosh.
these glasses. You know.
I was too poor to afford it. I'll just look like this the whole time.
It's like, hello guys. We're talking
Yeah,
about Jacob.
yeah. Or just like this. What's up, man? I'm
There you
Chad.
go.
I'm Chad, the Bible talker about it.
Chad the Enchailer.
Do you think we're gonna get to 39 or not? I don't
Uh,
think we're gonna get to 39.
I don't know.
By yourself, you only got through two chapters, so I don't know.
I got through 3 chapters, but
What?
one of them was a genealogy, so it doesn't really count as a full chapter.
Yeah, that was really interesting. I had never thought about the fact that, or the idea of Esau, or Edom being like a sort of progressive new government system of
Yeah, very
government.
progressive. But it's weird. It's like it's I noticed that last week when I was doing it, and so it was just like there these are the same names.
Did you
And
notice that last week, like before you started doing the thing, or like,
no, like during the podcast I noticed it.
wow, yeah,
And
that's what it seemed like. That was exciting. You're like, if this isn't important to you guys, well, it's important to me.
yeah, exactly. But it was exciting. I was really excited about it,
Mhm.
as you can imagine.
I'm so excited about it now. I'm pumped.
Yeah,
I'm gonna tell everybody.
good. Okay, I'm recording, by the way.
Okay, that's fine.
So yeah, let's get started. We're in Genesis 37. Jacob lived in the land of his father's sojournings, in the land of Canaan. These are the generations of Jacob. Joseph, being 17 years old, was pasturing the flock of his brothers. He was a boy with the sons of Bilhah and Zilpah, his father's wives. And Joseph brought a bad report to them to their fathers. Now Israel loved Joseph more than any other of his sons, because he was the son of his old age, and he made him a robe of many colors. But when his brothers saw that their father loved him more than all his brothers, they hated him and could not speak peaceably to him. Now Joseph had a dream, and when he told it to his brothers, they hated him even more. He said to them, "Hear this dream that I have dreamed. Behold, we were binding sheaves in the field, and behold, my sheaf arose and stood upright, and behold, your sheaves gathered around it and bowed down to my sheaf." His brothers said to him, "Are you indeed to reign over us, or are you indeed to rule over us?" So they hated him even more for his dreams and for his words. Then he dreamed another dream and told it to his brothers and said, "Behold, I have dreamed another dream. Behold, the sun, the moon, and 11 stars were bowing down to me." But when he told it to his father and to his father rebuked him and said to him, "What is this dream that you have dreamed? Shall I and your mother and your brothers indeed come to bow ourselves down on the ground before you?"
His brothers were jealous of him, but his father kept the matter in mind. Now his brothers had gone to graze his father's flocks near Shechem. And Israel said to Joseph, "As you know, your brothers are grazing the flocks near Shechem. Come, and I am going to send you to them." "Very well," he said. So he said to him, "Go and see if all is well with your brothers and with the flocks, and bring word back to me." Then he sent him off from the valley of Hebron. When Joseph arrived at Shechem, a man found him wandering around in the fields and asked him, "What are you looking for?" He replied, "I'm looking for my brothers. Can you tell me where they are grazing their flocks?" "They have moved on from here," the man replied. "I heard them say, 'Let's go to Dothan.'" So Joseph went after his brothers and found them near Dothan. But they saw him in the distance, and before he reached them, they plotted to kill him. Here comes that dreamer, they said to each other. Come now, let's kill him and throw him into one of these cisterns, and say that a ferocious animal devoured him. Then we'll see what comes of his dreams.
But when Reuben heard it, he rescued him out of their hands, saying, Let us not take his life. And Reuben said to them, Shed no blood. Throw him into this pit here in the wilderness, but do not lay a hand on him, that he might rescue him out of their hand, to restore him to his father. So when Joseph came to his brothers, they stripped him of his robe, the robe of many colors that he wore, and they took him and threw him into a pit. The pit was empty, there was no water in it. Then they sat down to eat, and looking up they saw a caravan of Ishmaelites coming from Gilead, with their camels bearing gum, balm, and myrrh, on their way to carry it down to Egypt. Then Judah said to his brothers, What profit is it if we kill our brother and conceal his blood? Come, let us sell him to the Ishmaelites, and let not our hand be upon him, for he is our brother, our own flesh. And his brothers listened to him. Then Midianite traders passed by, and they drew Joseph up and lifted him out of the pit, and sold him to the Ishmaelites for 20 shekels of silver. They took Joseph to Egypt. When Reuben returned to the pit and saw that Joseph was not in the pit, he tore his clothes, and returned to his brothers and said, The boy is gone, and I, where shall I go?
And they took Joseph's coat, and they slaughtered a kid, and they dipped the coat in the blood. And they sent the fine woolen coat, and they brought it to their father. And they said, We have found this. Now recognize whether it is your son's coat or not. He recognized it, and he said, It is my son's coat. A wild beast has devoured him. Joseph has surely been torn up. And Jacob rent his garments, and put sackcloth on his loins, and mourned for his son many days. And all his sons and all his daughters arose to console him, but he refused to be consoled. For he said, Because I will descend on the account of my son as a mourner to the grave. And his father wept for him. And the Midianites sold him to Egypt, to Potiphar, Pharaoh's chamberlain, chief of the slaughterers.
Okay. Did you notice anything here?
Yeah, there are quite a few things that are sort of interesting. I mean, it's just interesting the fact that it starts off the generations of Jacob, and then it just says Joseph. It doesn't talk about any of the others. It starts with one of his last sons, right?
Mm-hmm. Well,
And the description of him.
yeah. I think when we've talked about Jacob and Esau and all that sort of stuff,
Mm-hmm.
we were talking about the generations of Isaac. Like we were still in that story. And I don't know how many of the previous episodes you've watched, but my theory is that every time it says these are the generations, it's switching stories, or
Mm-hmm.
it's switching myths. And it makes sense if, especially in the ancient world, if you were not really just you were you and your children, basically. And so the generations of Isaac would then include like the strife between Esau and Jacob. And now the generation of Jacob is including the strife between his brothers.
Or the generation of Joseph, you mean, right? In this case.
No, because it
Oh,
says
okay.
Jake. Where is it?
Verse two.
These are the
These are.
generations of Jacob.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
And so we're talking about the myth of Jacob, and so now as it's switching stories, it's generally talking about the relationships between the brothers.
Yeah. Yeah, and it's no, I recall you saying that, and that makes sense as far as just how the Torah is organizing
Mm-hmm.
the different myths. It's interesting how like it just when it's talking about Esau, there are no like stories really about Esau. It's all in relationship to the promised line basically,
Right.
and then it quickly like zooms in as soon as it gets back to the characters of the promised seed, basically, Jacob, Joseph, and Isaac.
Mm-hmm. Although it does tell us about the origins of Amalek, which is important later.
Hmm. Yeah. Well, just like yeah, but it just like mentions it as a footnote because those are all sort of they end up being the wicked people in one way or another, even if they're not quite so terrible, when we're talking about Esau.
Yeah,
Um,
yeah.
yeah.
Well, it's like despite their wickedness, they are seen as the kindred of the chosen line, and so therefore they're
Hmm.
given some sort of special status as the kindred. But that doesn't mean that they will be that they cannot be destroyed by God,
Hmm.
and we see
Yeah.
that in like what's it called, Obadiah, for instance.
Hmm. Yeah, but it sort of seems like their relationship, and we're kind of focusing on the previous chapter now at this point, but it really does seem like their relationship is with God is no different than how a righteous Gentile was seen in the time of Jesus, where it's somebody who attaches themselves to the people but doesn't want to really become fully one of the people. Um, so that person who's actually made an effort to be around them, that's the relationship that all of the kindred of the promised line, or secondary kindred of the promised line, uh, sort of exist in. But just like a righteous Gentile can stop being a righteous Gentile by not, showing love to God's people, so can the kindred be cast off. Like it's just as easy.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So.
So moving on to this chapter,
Mhm.
I think I think that there are definitely a couple interesting things. You mentioned that you had a few things you wanted to talk about.
Oh, there's just a few things, through the chapter. I mean, it's it's what I was saying at the beginning is it's just interesting how it starts off with Joseph. None of the other brothers get a story, so obviously Joseph is like really important. I mean, Judah gets a story, but ask after Joseph, and he's one of the oldest. Reuben doesn't really get a story; he just gets a bunch of footnotes. The sons of the handmaids don't don't get any story at all.
Mm,
Um,
mm-hmm.
and and so it is sort of interesting how that seems to mirror Jacob's treatment of them. How the sons of the handmaids sort of when he came to Esau, he put them in the front. So if Esau was going to attack them, they would be the first to die after Jacob dies, and then the others could flee. So I think that that's sort of an interesting thing to note. And then right after this is a verse that's sort of confusing that the rabbis have a tradition about, but I don't know how to work it out otherwise. Verse 2, it says, now Joseph was 17 years old, being a shepherd. He was with his brothers with the flocks, and he was a lad, and was with the sons of Bilhah and with the sons of Zilpah, his father's wives. And Joseph brought evil tales about them to their father. But then when you read in the NIV, verse 2, it says, Joseph, a young man of 17, was tending the flocks with his brothers, the sons of Bilhah and the sons of Zilpah, his father's wives, and he brought their father a bad report about them. And then, no, it was the KJV, I believe that was the one that was confusing how it reads. But like the question is, who is he bringing an evil report about? And you'd think that it would just be the sons of Bilhan, the sons of Zilpah, um, but the for some reason the Rashi has a sort of contrary tradition that he's bringing a bad report about the sons of Leah.
Mm, interesting.
So I'm not sure what to think about that. Oh, yeah. Okay. And then the King James, it just reads differently because of the style of English. His father's wives and Joseph brought unto his father their evil report. So he's just speaking evil. So
Mm-hmm.
it's an interesting introduction to Joseph. He's a lad. The rabbinical interpretation is that when it says he's a lad, he's childish and he's bringing evil report. And so that's just sort of not a great start to the introduction to Joseph.
Yeah, yeah. From what I understand, he's 17 here ish.
Hmm. Yeah, that's what it
It
says
says
actually.
17
Yeah.
years old. Yeah.
Hmm.
Um. Yeah, yeah. And so this sort of introduces us to Joseph's character, at least in the beginning. And I've always said that I don't really like Joseph that much until he gets older. I think
Yeah.
he's a little bit of a self-serving. I'm not supposed to use the word, but you know, little rascal,
Hmm.
self-serving little rascal, I
Yeah.
suppose.
Yeah. He's a punk basically.
Yeah, yeah.
But I mean I think that like if you just we don't use that phrase he was a lad, so I like when I first read that, a long time ago whenever I read that, I never really thought of it, but now that I read it, um it just makes sense that it's sort of talking about his immaturity. And on top of that, I used to think that him bringing the evil report was sort of like he was telling it, he was just being a tattletale. But it seems more like he's either making up stories or he's like intentionally being misleading, which would line up with someone being, selfish and self-serving.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, yeah. And he's already the favorite. And so it doesn't really make sense why he would want to do that sort of stuff because
Mm-hmm.
he's already the favorite and potentially he's already receiving like this all this attention. He's getting the coat of many
Mm-hmm.
colors, which signifies the sort of chosenness of him as being the future head of the family. So
Mm-hmm.
it's already like, why is this? Why is he adding to that? And I think it's just it seems gratuitous. It seems like he just it's more his the way he has fun.
Yeah.
And we get
Well,
and we get that with the other stories too, where he tells his brothers and his fathers about the dream. He's like, yeah, also, you guys are all gonna serve me one day.
yeah.
Or he's like, this is the imagery that God gave me. I don't know what it means, but maybe you guys can tell what it means.
Yeah, that is a weird one to read, but I think this is interesting where you and I have different perspectives because you're the oldest kid, and so you of course wouldn't get the youngest kid being a turd and doing these things that seem self-serving and gratuitous. But me, being the youngest boy and almost the youngest child in my family of seven, I completely understand this. Like looking back, I was a real turd to my older siblings, and I was always trying to sort of get the upper hand. And
Mm-hmm.
even though, obviously the youngest get more attention because they're younger and the older ones can sort of handle themselves. And so I think it makes sense. As far as Joseph's dream, though, I think definitely you're probably right about that, sort of his perspective on it. Um, and at the same time the dream has like a very important meaning that's real, and I mean it's obviously real because of what happens later in the story. um,
Mm-hmm.
so it's like, it's not as if he's making it up, and I guess that sort of goes into what should be a Christian's view on dreams, because I think the Jewish view on dreams is that they are extremely important. They're basically messages from God. Um, and I don't know that there's really a cohesive view of that by Christianity. I think there's a lot of different views, but maybe it's the same with Judaism as well.
Well, yeah, no, there are different views in both camps. Like if you get the more mystical, the more like charismatic side of Christianity, then you get some theories about dreams.
Mm-hmm.
And as studying psychology, of course, I've studied a little bit about Freud's interpretations of dreams and Jung's and stuff. And the interesting thing is juxtaposing that to the Christians' sort of usage of the Bible to help interpret dreams and figure out the archetypes that you see in dreams and stuff.
Mm-hmm.
But on the Jewish side, it's from what I understand, it's basically the same thing. Although I think they have a slightly more set down code of how to interpret dreams, at least on the mystical side. On the non-mystical side, I think most people are just like, yeah, God can send us messages via dreams. Does he do that normally? Probably not.
Mm.
So it's like, not every dream is a message from God, but it is a medium that God can use. And I think at least when you get to the mystical side of Judaism, the idea is when you go to sleep, you're more or less entering the spiritual world. It's very much an ancient Egyptian view of sleeping. And so you have a higher likelihood of, or a higher susceptibility to spiritual influences when you're sleeping. And so dreams, and this is why we say the Modéani, for instance, in the morning, because the whole idea around the Modéani is that it is thanking God for putting our spirit back into our body, because the idea is that our spirit has left the body and it's now in like paradise or something. So they think because we're closer to God when we're sleeping, then he can also give us messages in a more clear way when we're sleeping. And so that's what dreams oftentimes come from. And of course, I don't know much about that. I think it's a possibility. It's also, I wouldn't die on that hill in any way. So
it's and then another thing that's interesting is that throughout this chapter, and once we eventually get to the chapter about Joseph's captivity in Egypt, like every descriptor of him, besides him being like a dreamer, which is one of the main characteristics of him, is sort of a mirror to his mother, just showing his likeness to his mother. Um, One thing that's towards the end of this, there's stuff in between that, but one thing that I'm really thinking about right now is his dream, when he dreams that it's going to be the sun and the moon and the 11 sheaves bowing down to him, and Jacob says, "What will your mother and I also bow down to you?" Basically, and then the question is, what mother? His mother's dead. So I was wondering what your thoughts on that are.
well, I don't think, like, yeah, his mother is dead at this point. At least we assume. We're not entirely sure how old he was when Benjamin was born, but we assume it was before this point. But I think that it's more symbolic. Like the moon is more symbolic, and it's talking about the mothers of this little flock here. Like all of them are encapsulated in the moon in the imagery. So it's more because they all have an authoritative role over the children. Now, like they might have a more authoritative role over their specific children, but I also Bilhah and Zilpah, they're handmaids, and although it says that they're wives, they're more like concubines. And so the real mother or the matriarch of the family would be Leah. Bilhah and Zilpah are like second in command to Leah in terms of the female authority. And so like that's just how the family structure would work. And so when it says the moon singular, it's probably not referring to Bilhah and Zilpah because they're not the matriarchs. It's probably only referring to Leah in this instance. And Leah would have a great deal of authority as the mother, as the matriarch of the family, and Joseph and Benjamin and all of the other sons, if I had to make a guess, would probably have to show deference to her, honor your father and mother. That would apply to her. So that's my assumption at least. And so the moon here, I think, would refer to Leah if Rachel's dead.
Yeah, the commentary basically. I mean, obviously, there's different opinions, but at least the one that's accepted by Rashi is that it's talking about Bilhah, because I believe Bilhah was Rachel's handmaiden, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And so it basically says that she's the one who raised him, and so that's who it's talking about. I'm not sure that it's really important. Um, but I mean, that's a good explanation. That's one I'd take. I
Mm-hmm.
guess I I guess that's not one of those super important facets of this chapter. But then there's another thing as well. In verse 25 and moving on from there, it's talking about him being sold into slavery. And it's a little confusing. It seems a little bit contradictory, or just not clear at the very least. And it says basically, and behold, a caravan of Ishmaelites was coming from Gilead, and their camels were carrying, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And then Judah suggests to sell him to the Ishmaelites so that the blood's not on their hands. And then it says, then Midianite men, merchants, passed by, and they pulled and lifted Joseph out of the pit, and they sold Joseph to the Ishmaelites for 20 silver pieces, and they brought Joseph to Egypt. Um,
Mm-hmm.
okay, and that's the last mention of it. So it's a little confusing because it's like the Ishmaelites they stop by the well for some reason because there's a group of 11 men, and then they're just like, well, we're not going to pull him out of that snake pit. And then some Midianite men come and and they're merchants as well. And they
Mm-hmm.
pull him out and then they sell him to the Ishmaelites, or is they referring to the sons, or did the sons sell him to the Midianites and then the Midianites sold them to the Ishmaelites? And then if that, what's the purpose of mentioning the Ishmaelites in the first place? Like mentioning them first as opposed to mentioning the Midianites first.
Hmm. Well, I guess we would have to learn. We would have to learn what Dothan was generally used for,
Mm.
and I don't really have that information. Is well, whenever I think about the story, I think about the movie, and it's helpful to create the imagery, but not helpful at the same time because now I am stuck in that imagery, and it's more difficult to get out of it. But um, it's possible that Dothan was near a trading hub, or at least
Mm.
near one of the circuits for multiple trading hubs, and so perhaps a variety of traders, merchants, like traveling merchants and stuff, caravans passed by there frequently.
Mm.
But the explanation I've always heard is that the Midianites and the Ishmaelites are the same group of people, and it's just switching between the different monikers for them.
Do the Midianites descend? I'm not remembering. I'm not very good with the genealogies, but do the Midianites descend from Ishmael?
I believe so. We can
Okay.
look at that really quick.
Okay, because I thought that they descended from someone else, but I may be wrong about that. Dothan means two wells. Let's see. And when I was reading the commentary, that the rabbinical commentary is basically saying that the word is similar to a word related to some legal term, and so it says that they're trying to find some legal way to kill him, basically. And
Interesting.
I remember Pastor Mark, I believe, sort of mentioning that in when we were going over this Torah portion some years ago. Um, so I remember that sort of being something that I heard about. Along with that, the pit, the why is it a dry pit? I remember Pastor Mark teaching that it's because it had snakes in it, and that's also in the in Rashi's commentary about why does the Bible mention it's a dry pit? Because it's a pit, so it's like obviously it's dry. It's not a well, and so yeah, I don't know why I wouldn't say there were snakes and scorpions in it, but
Mm.
just sort of just that extra stuff. I'm not sure if that has much use.
So Midian is from Keturah.
Mm-hmm.
Ishmael is, of course, if you assume that Hagar and Keturah are the same person, like you were talking about that
Mm-hmm.
one time,
Yeah.
then Midian would be like a brother to Ishmael.
Mm-hmm.
Um, I mean, they're still a brother. It's just whether or not you're a half brother or a full brother.
Yeah,
But
they'd still be different families, so I think it would make sense to distinguish them. But the only question is sort of the order. Like it mentions the Ishmaelites were coming, and then some Midianites came and pulled him out, and then they sold Joseph to the Ishmaelites. So they're clearly, yeah, it's confusing the writing structure. Maybe it would make more sense if I understood Hebrew, but the rabbinic commentary, all it has to say on it is that it's to explain that he was sold a lot. you know,
um, well, most likely, and if we were to try to reconstruct the story behind that,
mm-hmm.
I would think that Midianites and Ishmaelites, at the very least, were close to each other. Like, let's say
Mm-hmm.
Keturah and Hagar are the same person.
Yeah.
Then you have Ishmael, who has actual younger brothers, and these are, I mean, they're significantly younger, but they are full blooded younger brothers. And while Isaac received the promised land, Ishmael went eastward and
Mm-hmm.
received some other land over there.
Wasn't it like Saudi Arabia?
Sure. Okay. And so, if that were the case, then you could imagine that if these are full blood brothers, then they would inhabit the same land. And the reason for that, I mean, the tribes of Israel, they all inhabited the same land, and Esau and Jacob were supposed to have inhabited the same land. What that's what Isaac blessed Esau with, or blessed Jacob with. Or no, he blessed Esau and Jacob with this. That
Mm-hmm.
Jacob would rule over his brothers, that is Esau, and that Esau would, when Jacob is not being all right, not being righteous, Esau would assert authority, and that's all within the same camp. Esau
Mm-hmm.
decided that that's not good enough, so he went over to Seir and away from the land of promise, and so you have basically the imagery of brothers dwelling in the same tent. So Ishmael and Midian, if they are full blood brothers, probably dwelt within the same land and they had a hierarchy of authority. And so Ishmael,
Mm-hmm.
being the oldest, would of course be the kingly brothership, the kingly line essentially.
Mm-hmm.
And anyone younger than him would be like family, but they are still lower on the hierarchy.
Yeah. Yeah.
So it would make sense that the Ishmaelites are passing. They have some of their brothers along with them, and they tell the younger brothers who are not the kingly line, but they're the servant line, or not servant line, but they're just not as high on the totem pole,
Mm-hmm.
to go and fish, or like go do the grunt work, go fish Joseph out,
Mm-hmm.
and then they bring him back to the Ishmaelites. So I think that makes
Okay.
sense to me. And
Okay, so basically you're saying that the Midianites are sort of considered under an umbrella with the Ishmaelites, so that's why it uses it. You're saying that it uses it interchangeably when
it
it
would,
says Midianite versus Ishmaelites?
yeah, I feel like it'd be like later if later in the history of Israel, if it said, yeah, and a bunch of Judeans were passing by, and then they sold them to the Judeans, and the Benjaminites went down and fished them out, and then they sold them to the Judeans. I feel
Hmm.
like it'd be similar to that. because
Mm,
they dwelt in the land of Judea. Both of them did.
yeah. Okay. That sort of makes sense because otherwise it just like it's. I mean, they're at the very least they're cousins. So yeah, that was just sort of confusing because it says the Ishmaelites came, and then the brothers say, "Let us sell him to the Ishmaelites," and then the Midianite men pull him out of the pit. Like, why didn't the brothers pull him out of the pit? I thought they
Mm-hmm.
were gonna sell him. So, like, the brothers were like, "We got a guy down there in the snake pit, and we'll sell it to you for 20 silver pieces." And they're like, "Okay," and then they do the work to pull him out of the pit, and
Yeah.
then and so then it's explaining the next verse that the brothers sold Joseph to the Ishmaelites, who were the Midianites,
Mm-hmm.
interchangeably, I guess. And then at the end of the chapter, it says, "And the Midianites sold him to Egypt." So the Midianites both pulled him out of the well, or not the well, out of the pit of snakes and scorpions, and they also sold him to Egypt. So the only conclusion that I can think of without it being a contradiction, or the only two, is that it's being used interchangeably, or the Midianites fished him out, sold him to the Ishmaelites. The Ishmaelites didn't like him, and then sold him to the Midianites. And the Midianites were like, "Well, we don't want to sell him back to the Ishmaelites again because we're just going to get him again." So they sell him to the Egyptians. So it's like just it's kind of
Yeah.
convoluted that way.
Or, you think about like a corporate structure, for
Mm-hmm.
instance. You have the owner of the structure. They don't really, maybe a corporate structure is let's say a franchise.
Yeah.
The franchisor is the person who, he doesn't make all the money that the franchisee makes, but the
Mm-hmm.
franchisee pays the franchisor in order to have the name and everything like that.
Mm-hmm.
And so if they are like brothers in this sense and they're traveling together, then it's very possible that the Ishmaelites were like, okay, well, I don't want to do any of the work, so you can take most of the money and we'll just take a little bit because we're the ones you're traveling with.
You just cut out. I'm not sure if that cut out on the. Okay, that might be my internet. Not sure. All right.
Um, so it might just be that uh, this is irritating. Where okay, pause. The great thing about the screen recorder that I use
Mm-hmm.
is that you can just pause it and you don't have to splice any videos in the future.
Oh, really? Did you do that
Yeah,
on time?
yeah, I paused
Wow.
it. I know.
Wow.
It's
Wow.
my the magic, that I have.
It's your proprietarily invented by you screen recorder that you just made.
Yeah, yeah. I just invented a screen recorder.
Nice. That's epic. That's epic. Oh, yeah, there is one other thing I wanted. Is it recording?
Yes.
Okay, there's one other thing that I wanted to mention. I don't know if you want to welcome everybody. Oh, okay. No, it's working. So this makes no sense. Anyways, verse 15, a man found him, and behold, he was straying in the field. And the man asked him, saying, "What are you looking for?" Who's the man, Zeli?
Well, Pastor Mark says that it's God,
Mm-hmm.
but I don't know. It's a man, some man.
Mm-hmm.
There's definitely a lot of rabbinic stuff on who the man is, like trying
Yeah.
to figure it out just based on like what he says and stuff. But I don't know.
Yeah, Rashi
You
says
know.
this is the angel Gabriel, as it is said in Daniel 9:21, and the man Gabriel.
Oh yeah. Well, possibly.
I never thought of this either. Like whenever I've been reading this, I just pass over this. And I'm like, okay, man found him. He's just some random guy walking, some random desert hobo walking through the desert, and he found Jacob, or
Well,
sorry, he found Joseph just wandering through the desert.
well, he's right by Shechem, so
Right.
Shechem is one of the major cities in the ancient Near East or
Mm-hmm.
ancient Canaan, and so it's. I mean, he could just be a settler, you know.
That's what I always thought, but it just doesn't seem right. It doesn't seem like like it doesn't seem like that's really giving the. It seems like it's taking the Torah for granted, and not like holding it to the high standard of every word in the Torah is like vitally important. Um, I I'm not sure what we would glean from it, other than sort of another evidence of God's providence to His people, which I think is important, like
Hmm.
to realize and recognize when God is providing for His people. Um, so I think that's the beauty of recognizing it as something special rather than just some random guy from Shechem. And that's the other thing is this is all happening around Shechem, right? Which is a terrible place for Israel.
I don't think it doesn't say that it's all happening around Shechem.
Hmm.
But they were pasturing near Shechem at the very least. So,
And then they went to Dothan, but there's obviously a reason that it mentions Shechem, or at the very least, even if there's not a reason that it's mentioning Shechem, which I think would be wrong to think that. Um, what are all the bad things that have happened at Shechem? Like in our time, looking back through the whole biblical accounts, all the biblical accounts, what are the bad things that have happened in Shechem?
well, I can't think of all of them off the top of my head.
Uh-huh.
But we do know that one of the greatest conversion experiences happened.
Yeah, so there's that. So there's that, which was Dinah, Jacob's daughter being, shamed basically by, whether through her fault or just purely Shechem's fault. And then this happens with Joseph right after that. Right after that, like we're not sure. I mean, I'm not sure if it's clear what time, like you were saying, or what the time is, because in chapter 39, it seems to pick up right where chapter 37 left off after we hear the whole story of Judah, which would have been several years at least, right?
Mm-hmm.
Um,
Yeah.
and then the at least the other thing, I believe it says Rehoboam, and I'm getting this from the commentary. Rehoboam went to Shechem, and that's where uh, the kingdom was divided,
Hmm.
basically, or that's it's a location that is associated with bad things happening. And then there was one other thing that I'm gonna try and find really quickly, but I think that we can move on uh,
Yeah.
to what you had to say because I've been talking the whole time.
If you find it, then yeah, let us know. I think um, basically this part of the story is setting us up to understand who Joseph is and sort of explaining how God judges via people. So, like I said, I think that Joseph was a bit of a rascal, a little bit of a punk, like you were saying, and
Mhm.
so he is not showing due honor, due deference to his brothers and to his fathers and mothers, and so I think part of this is God is sort of judging him for that because nothing happens without God at least agreeing to it or okaying it. And
Mhm.
so you have Joseph, he's being sold into slavery, and although he's sold into slavery, he learned hard work, he learned something, he's a really smart kid, and so he raises in the ranks, and then he gets like the whole thing with Potiphar's wife, he gets thrown into prison, and then he eventually raises in the ranks as well. And at the very end, once he's freed, once he's made second in command of Egypt, once all of that happens, his brothers come to him and they're like, "We're very sorry, but don't kill us." And he says that all of these things happen so that God could preserve life. And so you have sort of two things happening. God is judging Joseph. One, he is rehabilitating Joseph. Two, and he is doing all of this in his grand master scheme in order to preserve the life of all of the people in the surrounding areas. And Egypt, being the vessel or the vehicle for the preservation of life here, is blessed. Mm-hmm. And so I think that's something that's really interesting. God shows favor on Egypt for all of this. And, even in the Torah, there's favor that's shown to Egypt as like people who sheltered the Israelites when they were in need. And so, like, the Torah says that you shall not cast out an Egyptian. And so you're like, well, that's weird given the history. But the idea is that, they provided shelter at that time.
And food.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And so Egypt is given some sort of place of favor. And if you only go to Sunday school or you only read like the interesting stories, then you might think, well, Egypt is a terrible place. Why would God show favor to them? But God judges both. He orchestrates things. He preserves the life. He judges Egypt not only harshly but also fairly. And because Egypt has done good things, God judges them well at the same time.
Mm-hmm.
And so Joseph here, being a bit of a punk, he is experiencing the first part of this. He's been given this coat of many colors, like I said before, the signal that he is going to be the commander in, or let's say he has been given the symbolism of the firstborn. So he's going to be the ruler in the tribe of Israel.
Mm-hmm.
But the brothers have a different idea, so they sell him. Now, the interesting thing I think here is when Reuben says to his brothers, let's not kill him, let's not kill him because he's our brother. And Reuben is trying to be sly here and undermine all of his other brothers, sort of like how Joseph has been so far. Mm. But, of course, that backfires on him because he leaves. And so then Judah, having not served having not experienced his redemption arc yet, Judah says we should not kill him, but we should sell him. And of course, Reuben returns and he's like, what am I going to do? Now, of course, we know what happened with Reuben. He is no longer going to be the firstborn because he slept with Bilhah, I believe.
Mm-hmm.
And, that makes, it undermines his position. So now he's, from what I understand, trying to regain that position. But Reuben's character is a bit more of a fumbler. He's not the brightest guy, and he has passion, but not intelligence. It's not guided properly. And so he's trying to be sly. It backfires. And we also know later in the story, he tries to get Benjamin to be able to go with them by saying, you can slay my two sons. And that doesn't work out very well. Judah here is the actual intelligent one, the actual sly one. I
thought it was Judah who made the promise that his two sons would be slayed.
No, that was Reuben.
Okay.
Judah is the one that says, you can hold me accountable. So Judah is the one that he convinces Jacob to send Benjamin with them.
Mm-hmm.
And so we're getting introduced to their characters throughout this entire story, this whole myth. Joseph is a punk, but in the end, he's like probably savant level. He's really intelligent. He's he received messages from God, and he's a hard worker. So, that's set aside. Reuben, why did he get passed over for the firstborn? Well, he slept with his son, or with his father's concubine.
Mm-hmm.
and now he is no longer eligible. And so then you also have he's also not that bright, and he is passionate. He's probably a good warrior, but not that bright. And then you have, of course, Simeon and Levi. They get passed over because of their wrath and what they did to the Shechemites. And so Reuben is the next in line, and he does not
No,
get passed
Judah.
over. Or,
Judah.
sorry, Judah. Yeah, he
Yeah.
does not get passed over. And the reason is because he actually has wisdom.
Mm-hmm.
And
Yeah.
so that's what all of this is setting us up for.
Well, like obviously we can't view. So this is just one thing. Obviously, we can't view the story of Judah that happens right after this in chapter 38 as chronological because Joseph, the story of Joseph, picks up right after, and so I don't know if why is the right question, but at least where should we place the story of Judah chronologically with Perez and Zerah and
Hmm.
Tamar.
I'm not sure.
Mm-hmm.
Because the story of Judah happens over a long period of time, like years.
Yeah.
So probably like 10 years if I had to guess.
Mm-hmm. So it's probably more a literary tool that is being used or played out here.
Yeah,
Yeah.
if you had to give it a chronology, it probably did happen at around the same time that Joseph was raising or rising the ranks of Potiphar's household. If you
Mm-hmm.
just, and probably like when he was in prison as well.
Mm-hmm.
That's just if you had to guess, because it was like 2.5 years after he. No, no, no. It was 10 years after he exited prison when the story of the brothers coming to Egypt actually happens.
Mm-hmm.
And so it could have happened during that time, during the
Mm-hmm.
times of plenty. But yeah, I don't know.
Yeah. Yeah. And then the other thing you were talking about sort of Ruben's character being like kind of not the brightest. But I found the interesting thing about Reuben in this chapter being where he discovers that Joseph is missing, and he's like, "Where will I go?" And so I think that's important. I don't think it's just a random sort of verse.
Mm-hmm.
I'm not remembering what verse it is exactly. Um, Let's see. Reuben, okay, verse 29. When Reuben returned to the cistern and saw that Joseph was not there, he tore his clothes. He went back to his brothers and said, "The boy isn't there. Where can I turn now?" Um, and so that's sort of interesting that he does like have a. It does seem like he has a desire to, um, uh, not just like rise the ranks, but maybe try and redeem himself. But I think that's what you were saying. Or do you lean more towards he's trying to be scheming, but he's kind of silly about doing it?
I would say, I mean, we don't know.
Mm-hmm.
It seems like I don't think that he had care for Joseph. Like it says before that when he saved Joseph out of their hands, it was so that he could bring Joseph back to his father and undermine his brothers and sort of, regain his
Mm-hmm.
position.
Yeah.
And here he's tearing his clothes and he says, "The boy is gone, and where shall I go?" So he is still the center of attention for him.
Mm-hmm.
And that's
Mm-hmm.
sort of what it seems like to me.
Mm. Okay. Yeah, makes sense. No. Okay. Yeah, I can live with him being an irredeemable character, I suppose.
Not irredeemable, just,
Yeah.
he's not He has his own qualities, but leadership is not one of them.
Yeah, and being a good person is not one of them either.
Yeah. Okay, let's move on to chapter 38.
All right.
It happened at that time, so actually it was at that time, so probably right after the selling Joseph into slavery.
Oh man, okay. Oh yeah, because Joseph's slavery happened over a number of years.
Long time.
Okay, yeah. At the time of them selling him into slavery, so that's when it happened.
Yeah.
Okay.
But of course, this story from verse 1 to the end of the chapter is not just 10 years. The whole thing with Tamar probably happened at it, it probably extended like 10 years or so. But from the beginning of the chapter to the end of the chapter, it's probably closer to like 20 or 30 years.
Mm-hmm. Okay, there is an interesting thing that I think the commentary is very interesting.
Well, before we get
What?
into
Okay,
that,
yeah, we
let's
can read it.
read the chapter.
Yeah.
It happened at that time that Judah went down from his brothers and turned aside to a certain Adulamite, whose name was Hira. There Judah saw the daughter of a certain Canaanite, whose name was Shua. He took her and went in to her, and she conceived and bore a son, and he called his name Er. She conceived again and bore a son, and she called his name Onan. Yet again she bore a son, and she called his name Shelah. Judah was in Hezib when she bore him. And Judah took a wife for Er his firstborn, and her name was Tamar. But Er, Judah's firstborn, was wicked in the sight of the Lord, and the Lord put him to death. Then Judah said to Onan, "Go into your brother's wife and perform the duty of a brother-in-law to her, and raise up offspring for your brother." But Onan knew that the offspring would not be his, so whenever he went in to his brother's wife, he would waste the semen on the ground, so as not to give offspring to his brother. And what he did was wicked in the sight of the Lord, and he put him to death also.
Judah then said to his daughter-in-law Tamar, "Live as a widow in your father's household until my son Shelah grows up." For he thought, he may die too, just like his brothers. So Tamar went to live in her father's household. After a long time, Judah's wife, the daughter of Shua, died. When Judah had recovered from his grief, he went up to Timnah to the men who were shearing his sheep, and his friend Hira, the Adulamite, went with him. When Tamar was told, "Your father-in-law is on his way to Timnah to shear his sheep," she took off her widow's clothes, covered herself with a veil to disguise herself, and then sat down on the entrance to Enaim, which is on the road to Timnah. For she saw that, though Shelah had now grown up, she had not been given to him as a wife. When Judah saw her, he thought she was a prostitute, for she had covered her face. Not realizing that she was his daughter-in-law, he went over to her by the roadside and said, "Come now, let me sleep with you." "And what will you give me to sleep with you?" she asked. "I'll send you a young goat from my flock," he said. "Will you give me something as a pledge until you send it?" she said. He said, "What pledge should I give you?" "Your seal and its cord, and the staff in your hand," she answered. So he gave them to her and slept with her, and she became pregnant by him. After she left, she took off her veil and put on her widow's clothes again. Meanwhile, Judah sent the goat by his friend, the Adulamite, in order to get his pledge back from the woman, but he did not find her.
And he asked the men of the place, "Where is the cult prostitute who was at Enaim at the roadside?" And they said, "No cult prostitute has been here." So he returned to Judah and said, "I have not found her." Also, the men of the place said, "No cult prostitute has been here." And Judah replied, "Let her keep the things as her own, and we shall be laughed at. You see, I sent this young goat, and you did not find her." About 3 months later, Judah was told, "Tamar, your daughter-in-law, has been immoral. Moreover, she is pregnant by immorality." And Judah said, "Bring her out, and let her be burned." As she was being brought out, she sent word to her father-in-law, "By the man to whom these belong, I am pregnant." And she said, "Please identify whose these are, the signet and the cord and the staff." Then Judah identified them and said, "She is more righteous than I, since I did not give her to my son Shelah," and he did not know her again. When the time of her labor came, there were twins in her womb. And when she was in labor, one put out a hand, and the midwife took and tied a scarlet thread on his hand, saying, "This one came out first." But as he drew back his hand, behold, his brother came out. And she said, "What a breach you have made for yourself." Therefore his name was called Perez. Afterward his brother came out with the scarlet thread on his hand, and his name was called Zerah. So
this is an interesting. The English translation is interesting because I think the more like accurate translations say in verse 29 more like, "Being mighty, you have made yourself mighty," and it's sort of weird in English.
verse 29.
Yeah.
Interesting.
Yeah. And then there's another thing with this. While we're at this end of the chapter already, the phrase where it says, "And he did not sleep with her again." I was reading something that said basically that phrase is confusing because the same phrase is used elsewhere in the Bible. If I can find the location of it to say the opposite. And so it's like he either did sleep with her again or he didn't sleep with her again. So it's not clear, at least from what that commentary was saying.
Well, what does the Hebrew say?
Um, Okay, gotta go back. Okay. Yeah, this is why we need to know Hebrew. But if even people who grew up studying Hebrew don't have an answer, what hope could we have to know? I guess we would just have to make a decision.
What was the verse? 29?
Yeah, verse 26, where it says Judah recognized him and said, "She is right. It is from me because I did not give her to my son Shelah," but he no longer continued to be intimate with her.
Velo Yasaf od Lidata. Yeah. What's the other place that you mentioned where this phrase is?
It's in Numbers 11:25 in connection with Eldad and Medad.
Numbers 11:25.
Yeah, 11:25. When the Spirit rested upon them, they prophesied, but they did not continue.
That means the same thing. They did not continue.
Oh.
Velo Yasafu.
Oh, hold on. Okay, I'm not sure what that commentary was saying then. I might, yeah.
Okay. Well.
Oh, no, sorry. The Targum, it's the Targum that renders it the opposite. The Targum says that it means they did not cease when the Targum is talking about Numbers 11:25.
Okay. Well.
Yeah.
Translations.
That's not important. That's not important. But I do have.
It's important for probably Second Temple Judaism. At this point, we're just trying to figure out what the text says. But this is, I think, a really good story for, again, like I was talking about last week, case law. So, first of all, the Levirate marriage thing, you know, you have a brother and he marries a girl and he dies and he does not have any children with her, then it's your duty to marry her and bear one child for your brother so his line can continue, and then the rest of the children are yours. But she's still considered your brother's wife. She's not technically your wife. You can still marry another woman, for instance. So here, this demonstrates that this law was in existence before Abraham, or before Moses. Moses was just reiterating the law. I think Moses is probably the first redactor in terms of these sorts of things. But at the same time, Moses was giving this law, or he was giving this story to demonstrate the importance of this law, that God sees the not performing your duty to your brother as an act of profound wickedness.
Mm. Even if your brothers were exceedingly wicked, like it says both of them were.
Right. Yeah, exactly. Your responsibility is not to judge your brother after he's already dead. Your responsibility is to do your responsibility. And
So
so
then, oh, go ahead.
so okay. So just regardless of whether your brother was wicked or righteous, you do the right thing that you have to do. You do your duty.
Yeah, but then at the same time, we have to ask the question, uh, like I don't even know if it's a question. I think it's just obvious to me. Like if the wife of your brother doesn't want to, and she's just um, she doesn't want to have kids for him. I mean, you can't force that, and that might be modern contemporary terms speaking, but it's like if they actually the Torah does talk about this, doesn't it? Oh no, it's from the opposite perspective. See, it's sort of like the case law sort of shows or it assumes basically that the woman is going to want to have children, basically.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And and in those times, I mean, even from the story, we can tell that a woman whose husband dies is not going to be looked upon favorably because at the very least, the people who have suitors for her, presumably her father-in-law, is not going to want the rest of his sons to die, and so this really comes from like that sort of perspective that I don't think would exist today with widows, because I think that with women being much more independent today, it's sort of it's not an
Yeah.
issue.
Well, it does demonstrate a modern perspective that children are a burden or they're
Mm-hmm.
an option. In those
Mm-hmm.
days, children weren't an option. It
Yeah.
was children. Children were one of the highest blessings that you could receive from the Lord,
Right.
and so yeah, it assumes that you want children, and it's the same thing with Onan. He wanted children. He just didn't want his brother to have children.
Mm-hmm.
And that's why what he did was exceedingly wicked. Because once Judah divides his estate amongst his sons, Er, who's the firstborn, will receive the double portion. But if
Mm-hmm.
Er doesn't have any children, then Onan gets a double portion. And
Mm-hmm.
so it's a way of saying in secret, I'm not doing my duty, but everyone else thinks I'm doing my duty. So uh, it's just happenstance that Tamar doesn't have children, and so me and my wife, we're gonna go and we're going to have all of the privileges of actually being the firstborn, even though we're the secondborn.
Mm-hmm. And then the question that I have from based on that is like if this is supposed to be a good example of case law, which I think it already is, sufficient, but why doesn't it explain how Er was wicked? And do you think that it's worth trying to find an explanation for that, or um,
Perhaps. I
mhm,
think that that's not the point of the story, though. Otherwise, it
mhm,
would tell us. The point of the story is he was wicked. God judges wickedness, and he can
mhm,
just put someone to death on the spot.
mhm,
The point of the story is, given you have a wicked relative, is your duty absolved
mhm,
to them? And the answer is no, it's not.
mhm,
A dead wicked relative, of course, because a wicked relative who's still alive, you have to have wisdom in those sorts of things, and you can't let them take advantage of you or destroy your property or anything along those lines. But given a dead wicked relative, do you still have a duty to propagate their line? The answer is yes.
mhm.
And
Yeah, yeah,
and so the point is not his wickedness. The whole point of the story is what is the duty of Onan, and then ultimately we get the Davidic line from Judah and Tamar. But it's interesting. Judah's wife has already died at this point, so these are his children. He's just going out and doing his stuff. Um, yeah. So anyway,
His wife just, well, no, he did the mourning ritual, but his wife just died. Like,
mhm.
what is, how long is the mourning period? Is it 45 days?
I think it's 40.
40 days? Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. So like
Well,
40 days, and then he's like, all right, time to get back to business. And then he's like, oh, cool, a shrine prostitute. Just like
yeah.
this story, just like it's fascinating how like the heroes of the Bible, they are not, there's not a lot of flattery for them. But then, the you could call them side characters, but even though they have like very small amount of writing about them, they're extremely impactful. Like the righteousness of Tamar is kind of crazy, and the amount of humiliation that she was willing to put herself through, to do the right thing, because she was helpless. There was nothing she could do. Judah was basically like, ah, you're garbage. You know,
Hmm.
bye. Like she's completely helpless. What could she do? And two of her husbands died. You know, and so it's interesting that this story is about Judah, and Judah is probably one of the people who's the least flattered in this story.
Yeah.
But
He doesn't raise his kids. Well, first of all, he goes to a foreign nation.
yeah,
Second of all,
and
he
why'd
falls
he do
in.
that?
Right. Second of all, he falls into a with a bad crowd. Third of all, he doesn't raise his children right. Er and Onan both are not great people. And fourth of all, he marries them to a foreigner, which is not what you're supposed to do. He's like the first one to break that habit of marrying within the righteous line. And fifth of all, he visits prostitutes. So, I mean, the list goes on.
Yeah,
He he's not put in a flattering light, and I think one of the most telling things here is that he knew that Tamar was saved for Shelah.
yeah,
He did not marry Shelah to Tamar.
yeah,
And then when Tamar gets pregnant, his first instinct is to say, "You're supposed to be with Shelah. I'm going to burn you to death."
yeah.
It's like,
You're supposed to be waiting for me.
yeah, yeah, you're
Uh,
supposed to be waiting for my son,
yeah,
but even though I'm not giving him to you.
yeah.
So you're like, really what he's saying is you should just be a cut off branch, basically. Like, you should have absolutely no relations in any
Hmm.
way to anybody. So
Yeah.
why are you like you're under my household? So
Yeah, and he should have realized right there. Like it took him too many steps to realize. He should have realized right there. Oh, your daughter-in-law's pregnant, and then he quickly is like, burn the witch.
right, right,
He literally should have realized when they said that. Oh my gosh, I was supposed to do this, but no, he's just trying to,
yeah,
he's just trying to wash the outside of his cup without washing the inside of his cup, and so that's just, yeah,
yeah.
it's quite fascinating. But this, I was listening to this debate, between Richard Dawkins and Rabbi Jonathan, the late Rabbi Jonathan Sachs,
Hmm.
and it was
Yeah.
interesting because he was, it's not really related to the debates. I don't know why I mentioned, but anyways, he was mentioning that basically the whole Bible is a polemic against authority, um,
Hmm.
and so this is sort of like, or not like the misuse of authority, I think is what he was saying.
Authoritarianism.
Yeah, yeah, and that's exactly what Judah's doing. He's like, your life, you're not to walk outside of these bounds, and my responsibilities to you doesn't matter, and they don't matter. Like you just have to do this until I say jump, and you ask how high. That's it. And so it's completely ignoring the character of God, where He makes promises to us and He's going to fulfill them, and we're supposed to, be committed to Him. But even if we break that, He doesn't like wipe us off of existence. Like He literally sent His Son, to die for us. Like God
Hmm.
is the one who took the punishment for us breaking the covenant. Um, and then Judah is doing exactly the opposite. He's like, you broke our covenant that I didn't fulfill my responsibilities to, so you're gonna die. It's like
Mm-hmm.
this
Yep.
perverted version of God's covenant with us.
Yeah, yeah. And it's these sorts of humiliations that gives Judah the wisdom that he has later.
Hmm.
And so that's, I think, another one of the interesting things is that, like, he's not that great of a guy, like, in his early
Hmm.
years, but going through all of these, like, losing two sons, making all these mistakes, and,
Hmm.
like, being so quick to judge, and then being humiliated by these publicly. Like, it seems like it's public what's going on, because he's telling the town to burn her, and then he
Yeah.
just immediately stops. He's like, Actually, I'm not going to prosecute this woman." So, and they're like, "Why?" And he's like, "I'm just not going to." You know.
Yeah. Yeah. And
But, like,
this
all
is.
of this is what leads to his wisdom in the
Mhm.
end when he gets older.
Yeah. And this is where, like, I will go back to the commentary for verse 25 when it says she was taken out and she sent for her father, saying, "From the man to whom these belong, I am pregnant." And she said, "Please recognize whose signet ring, cloak, and staff are these." Like, she could have easily been like, "You got me pregnant," and just embarrassed him right there. But
Mm-hmm.
then the commentary says, well, the reason she didn't do that was because she didn't want to humiliate him. She wanted to give him the option to humble himself, humiliate himself, or to be wicked. And in the end, he like took that guy. Man, that guy's got a thick head, and Lord keep us from having such thick skulls. But in the end, he did choose to humiliate himself to save her because it was the right thing to do.
Mm-hmm.
And the lesson that the commentary draws from that is basically it has this kind of extreme phrase: it's better for someone to burn in fire, or like burn in a furnace, like kind of a callback to Daniel, than to humiliate his brother,
Mm.
publicly.
Yeah.
So
Yeah,
then
that's true.
and that's just like it's another thing. It's like I don't know why this isn't called the story of Tamar because like it's just like wow, Tamar is like man, just way up here as far as righteousness. But again,
Mm-hmm.
it just goes back to that you know concept in the Bible where the heroes aren't flattered. It's you know
Mm-hmm.
so.
Yeah. Well, it's not the story of Tamar or Judah, it's the story of
Mhm.
Israel at this point.
Yeah, yeah,
And so it's talking about how the sons of Israel have interacted in their early years with the people around them.
yeah. Well, there was no time where Israel was perfect, and that I think
Mm-hmm.
that's isn't that I remember loosely hearing some teachings about this why Jacob's name is God says it's not to be called Jacob anymore but Israel, but still the Torah repeatedly switches even in the previous chapter between calling him Israel or Jacob, and I think the teaching was like saying that it's Jacob when he's not particularly being righteous. Like,
Mm.
for example, it says that Jacob, I believe, gave him the coat of many colors, showing favoritism. And then when he is doing God's will or being righteous, it calls him Israel. For example, when he sent Joseph out to go observe
Mm.
the sons to see if everything was going all right.
Yeah, I don't buy that.
Mm-hmm.
It switches sometimes in the same sentence, and
Mm-hmm.
I don't know. I just feel like there's a reason, but that's not the reason.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't know what the reason is, but I don't think it's that one. And I mean, I don't know. We can take a look at, like, the specific instances where it does switch, but
Mm-hmm.
I mean, you're right. Well, the issue is sometimes when he calls him Israel, he's doing a bad thing, and sometimes when he calls him
Mm-hmm.
Jacob, he's doing a good thing. So,
Mm-hmm.
that's the issue I think I have with that. But we just, yeah, I don't think we know.
Well, I think the idea behind the name Israel, I mean, I don't think this is just what it says. The reason he's called Israel is because he strives with God and man and he prevails in the end. And so, and he had a sort of a mini loss there when he was wrestling with the angel or God.
Mm-hmm.
Not sure which one. Where, he lost his hip, but he still prevailed.
Mm-hmm.
And so at the very least, I would tie that into how this is all the story of Israel, how Israel falls down into wickedness and then returns to repentance, and it's just over and over and over again, um, just all the way from the beginning of Israel till now.
Yeah.
It's just a cycle of breaking the covenant and trying to return to Him, and so like hopefully we can all just be better than that one day.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I do think that just from a legal standpoint, and this is as Messianics,
Mm-hmm.
oftentimes the argument against pronomianism, against obedience to the law, is that the law came later. And we hear this argument in like Hebrews, for instance. The law
Mm-hmm.
came later, and therefore it doesn't actually have, or it cannot annul the promise that came before, which is, during Abraham's time. But you see all of these laws in existence, even if they were not written down, they
Mm-hmm.
existed during the patriarchal times.
Yeah.
So one of the things is like, yeah, okay, the law doesn't annul the promise, but the law existed at that time. And
Mm-hmm.
whether it was in a sort of primordial or nuclear state or something,
Mm-hmm.
it still existed. And
Well,
one of the main points too is like the law is not, it's not arbitrary.
mm-hmm.
God gave these rules or commands because they reflect his character. And so
Mm-hmm.
if we want to reflect his character, then we obey them.
Yeah.
And they predate Moses. Moses is just, he's just redacting the things that
Mm-hmm.
God tells him to. He's
Mm-hmm.
taking all of these and he's putting them on paper, but they still exist before him.
Yeah. Yeah. In the beginning was the Word, and the Word was. Man,
Mm-hmm.
I can't believe I'm
And the
failing to
word was
quote this
with
properly.
God.
And the Word was with God, and the Word was God. Yeah. So I mean, the God's character exists with God.
Yeah.
It never it wasn't created, just like Jesus wasn't. Yeshua wasn't created. Um, and like it gets revealed more over time, like what we're supposed to do. The Messiah wasn't revealed until Yeshua came. The Torah wasn't fully revealed until Moses came. um, and the Noahide laws weren't revealed until Noah. It's sort of it all works together, and of course it doesn't annul the promise. It's literally how the promise is fulfilled.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So.
The other thing too is I read this paper recently. It was talking about this whole idea of cult prostitution, and I don't
Mm-hmm.
really buy the premise, but um, or I guess the conclusion. The conclusion of the paper is that if you actually read the Bible, if you actually look at all the times where prostitution occurs and sacred sites are, found in the same uh, text, it distinguishes between the two. And so the idea is that prostitution itself was not, like in the paper, the conclusion is that prostitution itself was not a something that was demanded of the gods.
Mm-hmm.
And they don't just go into the Bible, they also go into like other texts. Like, where do we get the idea that Babylon had a law that every woman had to be a prostitute at least once in her life? Like,
Mm-hmm.
yeah, they did, but was that a law that was in effect? And at the same time, it was it just like any man that came in before she gets married, or was it that when she got married, she actually, how she fulfilled this was consummating the marriage with her husband,
Mm-hmm.
but in like a sacred ceremony,
Yeah.
not just a consummation.
Yeah. Well, consummation was a sacred. I mean, it was like
Yeah,
people literally would watch it in England at some point, which is like a really weird thing. But like it's still it was seen as a sacred ceremony.
it's not that
Um,
weird. We
no,
do,
yeah.
you know, it's pretty obvious where that custom came from.
No, but like
It's
it I think it can be considered a sacred ceremony even if it's just not because today we try and take God out of everything. It's why we don't have a bunch of pagan gods everywhere. It's because it's people have lost their touch with like realizing that everything must be from God. And
mm-hmm.
so that's off a little bit. I find it interesting though that Tamar just sits by the side of the road, and Judah's like, "Oh, must be a cult prostitute."
Yeah.
And then Adullam comes back, and he's like, "Well, they said there is none there." So it's like she just took a piece of cardboard and wrote like prostitution shrine and just sat down on the side of the road, something.
Yeah, well, that's what I was getting at.
Mm-hmm.
There's evidence, at the very least, to say that we've kind of overblown the whole idea of cult prostitutes in the Bible,
Mm-hmm.
and like prostitution, from what I understand, was a cult practice, but how widespread it was and um, how connected to a particular god or goddess it was, I think, might have been overblown. And so it's possible
Mm-hmm.
that Tamar here, because the word used is just prostitute, we add the cult part to it. We assume
Mm-hmm.
that it's a cult prostitute.
Oh, okay, that's interesting. Okay, so the Hebrew doesn't actually indicate anything having to do with shrine or cult prostitute. It just says prostitute.
Yeah, yeah.
Hmm. Okay.
Um, but it does say, where does it say? Um, and wrapping herself. Robinson covers herself, wrapping herself inside in the entrance, and sat at the entrance to Enaim, which is on the road of Timnah.
Yeah, Genesis 38:15.
Yeah,
Saw her, he thought her to be a harlot, which is Zana.
yeah, yeah. And so, like, the entrance to a particular country, it's or to a particular nation. Enaim, I don't know if that's a region or if that's a city. If it's a city, then she was like probably an unwalled city, and
Mhm.
so it would just be like wherever they have decided Enaim ends. Um,
It actually explains. Sorry, I'm just backtracking a little bit, but it actually just explains why he thought she was a prostitute. It says he saw her and he thought her to be a harlot because she had covered her face.
yeah,
So it's like okay, so harlot is not a good thing. It's seen as a bad thing. Judah still does it, and his reasoning that she is a harlot is because she covered her face, so obviously she's trying to hide, her identity while she's doing the sin, so she doesn't get caught and stoned, which is you know it indicates the opposite of cult prostitutes here. It indicates that prostitution is already a death sentence, and then you know uh,
yeah. Well, it's seen as shameful, but
mhm,
hiding your
at least,
face,
yeah.
yeah, yeah. Yeah, it's seen as shameful, and it's seen as maybe not a death sentence. Like
Hmm.
maybe it was an accepted practice, but at the very least, it's not something that a woman wanted people to know that she was one.
Hmm.
So that's why you would cover your face. It also is just the case that if you, like in those days at that time in that place, if you cover your face as a woman and you're not like in a marriage ceremony,
Hmm.
then you're a prostitute. That's
Yeah.
what it was. It's just like in if you go to a Muslim nation today and you're a woman, like let's say Iran or something, and you go and you don't cover your face, then you're a prostitute. Like
Yeah.
it's just how it is. In those days, it's the custom. But getting back to what I was saying before, I think that it's that because the Hebrew here doesn't actually say that she was a cult prostitute, it might
Hmm.
be a stretch or a jump to say that she was without any without good evidence. And I think that, especially because he's like, name your price, and she says, a kid. If I remember right, cult prostitutes, when they did perform their duty, it was more like you gave them coin. You didn't give them a flock or anything like that.
So it's like she's doing it out of poverty or something.
Yeah,
Almost.
something like that.
Yeah.
Or she was just a prostitute, Now, it's hard to say that anyone did anything without, like, some sort of divine aspect to it or spiritual aspect to it, because like you said, the gods were everywhere. Everything had a particular divine part to it, and or some sort of spiritual component. So it's not that you can say that she was a secular prostitute, but probably if she was not a cult prostitute, then she was a prostitute, and it was part of her devotion to a particular god or something. And that's just, what they said. And because there were gods of prostitution. Like,
yeah, but I think that you're right. Like the KJV and also the what Chabad reads doesn't indicate anything about cult prostitution at all. So it's kind of weird that it's added into like the NIV and other translations, and they don't have any commentary about it being cult prostitution either. And I'd have to read the Christian commentary to see if there's anything about that. But like it just seems like that's not a thing. And also there's obviously no shrine set up because Abulam went there and asked, and they're like, there's no one here that does that. So it's not an established thing there.
Yeah, exactly.
So.
Is there anything else you want to say on this chapter?
No, I think that's good.
Cool.
I mean, I'm sure there's other stuff to delve into, but that would take more time than we have today for today's program.
Yep.
Where is Chezib? It's the place at the beginning of the chapter in verse 5. Once again, she bore a son and named him Selah, and Judah was in Chezib when she gave birth to him.
Chezib.
Yeah. Like he wasn't with his wife.
Yeah, it was
another great characteristic of Judah.
It was northeast of Lachish.
But the point is that he wasn't with his wife.
Yeah. I mean, I think it's fair to say that he wasn't in the same vicinity as, where he was living before. It's west of the Jordan. It's west of Bethlehem, like just southwest of Bethlehem.
Okay. Yeah, it says in the plains of a town in Judah.
Yeah.
No.
But yeah, it's we should end it there.
I think so.
Unless you have any final things to say.
No, this has been enlightening.
Yeah. Next we get to talk about Joseph and Potiphar's wife.
Fun stuff.
Fun stuff.
This was really fun. Like to sort of come to more of a realization about just how, righteous, like in a heart for God Tamar had, and how far Judah had to come to be corrected. Oh.
Yep. Okay. Well, let's. If you have any questions, comments, or concerns, you can comment them below. Have a good day.
Bye.
Bye.